Hello again, I'm Barry James, and I'm delighted to have with me today a big thinker, another big thinker, in fact, who has a vision for health. And in fact, that's the name of his enterprise. We met only recently, but welcome, Andy Wilkins.
Thank you very much, Barry. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. As you say, big thinking is what's called for, so I'm looking forward to exploring this area with you today.
Yeah, for the listeners who haven't caught up with the series yet, this is the COVID Spring series where we're thinking into the future post-COVID. It's not going to be quick. We have the COVID winter to get through, but all the more reason to think about the future and the kind of society that we want to build, and the kind of values that should be built on, and how we can get together and build that. But so that's kind of the background to this. Andy, you're a specialist in health with deep background. Tell us a little bit about your background first, and then let's move forward to the work that you're engaged in these days.
Well, often people's careers go in a straight line. Mine hasn't, although it feels like it's come around in a circle. So I did study physiology and psychology at university. I then got seduced into forming my own rock band, decided to go off in that direction. I didn't become a rock star, of course, and then I had to get a proper job. So I've spent 10 years doing product development innovation in BT. So that's really when I got my sort of my spurs, if you like, in thinking about innovation and change. Got fed up of corporate life, as many people do. Did a spot for Arthur D. So that's parachuted in at the board level to think about things from a strategic perspective. Did that for a little while, had a startup, thought that I was going to be a millionaire, but it was in the dot-com bust, not the dot-com boom. Timing was all wrong. And since then, I've largely been doing consulting work around innovation and strategy. The last 7 or 8 years, more or less exclusively in health, which is full of the most amazing innovation challenges, but also some amazing opportunities. And that's where I've really focused my effort these days.
So one thing that we do have in common is, as I mentioned earlier, I spent a decade and more working with and for the health service from outside, really, and innovating. Gosh, that's difficult.
Oh, it is.
It's not easy. So, you know, the bureaucracy, the fiefdoms, and all of that. So hats off to that. But we're in a time of incredible advances in biotech and technology more generally, and there's multiple strands, aren't there? So talk us through some of that, would you, and how innovation happens, and what's wrong with it? Is there anything wrong with it?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about the project that's led to the formation of Vision4Health, the not-for-profit that I'm leading at the moment. And as I was saying in my introduction, I've come through a long cycle of learning more and more about innovation. And it started with product, and then it went to service, and then it went to customer experience. And then as you start to understand how organizations, institutions struggle with innovation, it became, how do you innovate the institution that does the innovating such that it can innovate? So throughout my career, I've been sort of getting into these bigger, thornier, more difficult, challenging problems. And I had the most amazing project 2 or 3 years ago when the Royal Free Charity, which is a charity that sits alongside the Royal Free Hospital, a big London hospital. The CEO there was very strategic and forward-looking. He recognized that healthcare, of which Royal Free is one of the big players, was faced with this huge challenge of innovation, that the acceleration that's going to be happening, or is already happening, around genomics, new forms of medicine, sensors, diagnostics, exploding levels of data, mean that the future of healthcare is likely to be very different from the one we have now. But most of the people in healthcare are incrementally innovating, adding bits onto their existing ways of doing things and unable to make sense of the sheer scale of the challenges coming. So the ask was, can you go away and research the future of genomics, the future of personalized medicine, the future of sensors and diagnostics, the future of machine learning and AI? Can you look at all those big mega trends and then roll them forward 10 to 15 years based on the research that you can do, and do a bit of systems thinking to say, if they all landed at scale, what could health and healthcare look like the other side of this? What might be a new vision for healthcare in a technology-enabled 21st century? Now, this is just the most amazing project to ever have got. Yeah. So it took about a year, huge amounts of research. It garnered a lot of interest from senior leaders around the healthcare system. So we spun up a steering group, which had the CIO and the Chief Digital Officer of NHS England, board member of Public Health England, the head of IBM Healthcare Europe, and a bunch of others. And the report that came out of that ended up being really a sort of a long-term vision, really what might a North Star for healthcare look like? And the value of that was really seen as helping institutions, policymakers, healthcare leaders, and life sciences and other actors to say, we all hold a piece of the jigsaw of the future, but we've never had a picture. If we have a sense of where this is all going, then that allows us to see what is the journey to get there and what forms of collaboration are going to be required to make that possible. And this is where I felt I am sitting on something so incredibly exciting and valuable that I dropped the consultancy work, picked up Vision4Health, and taking that forward, not really knowing what the business model for my own institution is, but feeling that this is such an important topic about what kind of future do we want to bring into being, because we need to debate and discuss that future. It has very profound implications for us as society. Lots of data, far more engagement of healthcare systems in our personal lives potentially. So how do we feel about that? How might we want to shape that so we can get ahead of the game and start to build, if you like, the tracks to that future, and build the kind of future we would like to see, rather than just have the future happen through accident, or as some would note, that Silicon Valley may well storm in and start to do this anyway, and we'll find a disintermediation of public healthcare by silicon or tech companies. We have an opportunity to think about that future, debate it and discuss it. What kind of future do we want? And put in the right policies and approaches to enable those actors to come together in a way that's going to serve better healthcare for us as individuals and society. And it feels that that way of thinking is so much needed in other aspects of life. So it's been an exciting roller coaster. I've got to meet many great thinkers. There's still a lot more work to be done, but that's Vision4Health and where we are at the moment.
Yeah, and it's a prescient time, I think, in that, you know, as we've said, we've proved, because we've had to as a society, that we can react quickly, we can react vigorously to when we need to, and we can come together when we need to. And I think that opens doors. But before we move on to maybe considering that a little bit more, I'm fascinated. Would you just paint a picture for us of what that future might look like? And yeah, while you're doing that, also with reference to who that future is for. Is it for everyone, or is it dual track?
Yes, no, it's a very, very good question. So one of the things that arises out of looking at the future is there's a number of dimensions to this that's worth exploring. One is, if you look at today's healthcare system, it's through a natural process of history. We have a number of specialisms. So if you walk into any hospital, you'll have the cardiology department, the urology department, the neurology department. So we have lots of specialists who are experts in a part of your body, and usually some diseases that associate with that. But as we look at the population writ large, we're getting older, we're getting often sicker, unfortunately. So we have more of these chronic diseases and what they call comorbidity, which are the complications that come from that. So more and more of us need to see more and more medical experts. But those medical experts tend to sit in silos. They're interested in one piece of your body. And what's happening in the healthcare system at the moment is that the older and sicker we get, the more that we end up feeling like a pinball inside a healthcare system which is pinging us from one place to another. Often the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing in terms of one expert and another expert, and the advice can often be contradictory. So one could caricaturize the current world as people have to wrap themselves around a highly siloed and fragmented health and care system. There are multiple experts you have to go to, and the point that it comes together is you, the patient or the citizen, trying to navigate all of this increasing complexity. So the future, if I could sum it up, is as more and more data becomes available from more and more sensors in the body, on the body, around the body, around, or in the environment, what becomes possible is to track the origins of disease and how it develops in the body in more real time, and be able to collect that data and look at it holistically, such that the medical and care expertise can wrap itself around you rather than you wrap yourself around a fragmented healthcare system. And this is going to bring untold benefits to be able to see someone's health in its totality, to be able to provide the right advice and guidance, but also bringing that health together in its totality also enables each of us as individual citizens to understand more completely and fully where we are in our journey and what are the sorts of things that we can do to support and maintain our own healthcare. Unfortunately, some of us will get sick and there will be medication and treatment, but how do we maximize the quality of life that we can get and minimize the avoidable suffering? And so technology really gives us a much better grip on understanding what causes disease, what are the pathways of disease, how might these new treatments and care be pulled together in a way that enables both the system and ourselves to navigate through that with the best possible health that we can imagine. And so this has huge impacts for us as agents. If we can live as long as we can without disease, and there's huge opportunities to sort of hack disease and be able to do that. But also the net result of a population able to spend more time living well means that we can more fully participate in our lives. We can be more active and productive and creative at work. So this will feed through to the economy. And also it has the potential to reduce the demand on a current health and care service, which is inexorably moving higher in terms of cost than the economy can afford. Because at the moment, we're not very effective at looking after people. This really turns everything upside down, and I think represents a really exciting vision for the future.
Yeah, so maybe if it sounds to me the sort of thing that we might be talking about, you know, is rather than me visiting the doctor when something's gone wrong, maybe an artificial intelligence sitting there in the cloud, specifically only interested in me and my health, able to detect things early, redirect, make recommendations on a day-to-day. Is that the sort of thing we're talking about?
Exactly. If you know, even today, 70% of the cost of the NHS is around treating chronic diseases. These are diseases that are behaviorally driven, i.e. we don't necessarily need to have them, but they're ones caused by unhealthy lifestyles that can lead to, you know, whether it's heart disease or diabetes and these kind of problems. And today's model, if you think about it, is that the system only ever reacts to when you feel that you're sick enough that you need to take a trip to the doctor. Yeah. So by the time that you become aware of these symptoms, the disease has usually got a good hold on you. So when you do go to the doctor and you have got one of these chronic diseases, it's likely they will say, you know, you've got type 2 diabetes or stage 2 cancer or whatever any of these other conditions are. And then you're into a life of perpetual drug taking to kind of mitigate the effects of that disease and hopefully slow it down. As we start to understand how disease originates, so quite often, well, if you look at the body, it's a complex adaptive system, and there are really fascinating insights now to how do genes speak to cells through the language of proteins. How do those proteins become corrupted or misplaced or misdesigned in such a way that starts to cause problems within the cell, that then leads to problems in cell clusters, which then lead to problems in tissues, which then lead to problem in organs, and then a problem in our felt sense. So as you look at the cascade of disease, what's the new technologies are enabling us to do is both understand that process and to be able to measure the biomarkers that indicate when things have started to go wrong. So once we start to be able to see when things started to go wrong before you've even felt anything, before you've even got the cancer, before you've even got the diabetes, there's an opportunity to support people in usually changing behaviors to shift the body away from this kind of causal cascade, or have a new set of treatments that can hack disease much earlier in its genesis. This is revolutionary. This points to a future where we no longer have to wait till we get sick before we then get the help, by which time it's often too late. We can really get in a lot earlier. And this just changes everything and heralds a really exciting new age of health and care. Because it's not only just about hacking disease, it's also about understanding how well is our body optimized? Is there more we could be doing to feel more energetic and alive and positive and feel good within ourselves? So it's not just the glass half empty, it's how do we understand how to support people to get the best out of life? And this really speaks to a whole new era of thinking about health, not just as the absence of sickness, but also the ability to live well, to be living with well-being, if you like, to live a life full of vitality and potential and possibility.
Yeah, so a health service that isn't a euphemism for a disease service, turning the whole thing on its head. Fascinating. How might we get there?
Well, this speaks to, I think, one of the challenges we see writ large across any institutional domain and any industry to some extent, is that often institutions have been set up around some historical legacy kind of rationale and have built themselves and are operating in a capacity where they're offering a product or service and trying to do it as most efficiently as possible for the best possible outcomes, whether that's financial in the private sector or meeting their charter in the public sector. And therefore, the basis from which innovation is thought about is, we've got what we've got, how can we incrementally improve what we have? And that is usually the basis for innovation. And there is a lot that can be done with that model, but where that institutional setup is wholly unsuited to the nature of the problem we're trying to solve, and where new technologies and capabilities allow us institutionally to solve that problem in a vastly better way, that's when the innovation gets stuck, because it requires more systemic big thinking to encourage actors to transform themselves into the new paradigm. And I think this sort of new paradigm, paradigmatic innovation, I think is a real important thing that we need to understand better, because the technologies and the capabilities that are coming along now are the most transformational in human history. But if we keep using yesterday's thinking to apply to tomorrow's technology, then we're not really going to get to tomorrow's solutions.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I moved out of the health field was the frustration with those fiefdoms. You described the different specialisms or hospitals in particular areas or whatever, and that really is a very limiting factor, and not only limits you to incremental change, but also limits incremental change in many cases as well. We'll not go off on too many tangents, but I could quote, instances. Oh, let me tell you this one story where I was at a particular very large hospital who shall remain nameless, who I was there to talk to them about the sort of latest, in connecting the laboratory with local GP practices. And they said, we absolutely want this, but we haven't got enough money in our budget this year. We should have it next year. I said, well, actually, Department X and Department Y also want it. Why don't you come together and it would be easy. You could all use it. And the guy fixed me with a steely eye, and he said, Barry, the one thing you haven't understood is that this hospital is a collection of warring departments held together only by a common heating system. And as I say, that's part of the challenge, isn't it? The how and what's it gonna take?
Yeah,
for this to happen. And maybe, is it going to come from Silicon Valley? Not very long from now, we'll probably all be wearing a watch like the latest Apple Watches that have sensors in them that can do the work of a pulse oximeter and probably other things. Do you think that's how is it going to happen? And if so, is that going to be how it happens, do you think?
Yes, so there's two things I'd like to say. One is answer that question. One is just touch a little bit on the previous problem of being trapped in warring silos and talk a little bit about why that happened. But on the first bit, I think you're absolutely right that technology is now evolving such that whether it's our phones or our wearables, or in China, they even have tattoos. So you don't even have a wearable, you can have a tattoo hidden somewhere that will measure your blood oxygen, your heart rate and steps and all of these physiological measures, which will there are forms of biomarkers to say, how are we doing? And there are many things you can deduce from that will give our pre-warnings for things that may be starting to go wrong, or indicators of something has gone wrong. And there's all that's going to be in the coming years is more sophisticated sets of things that you can measure. There's now sort of light spectroscopy type products in design at the moment that can actually peer through the skin and start to look at what the chemical composition of your blood is, to do a sort of biopsy of your blood without ever having to take any blood. So when you start to look at blood glucose and other types of biomarkers running through the body, what we're moving towards is the ability to see our body in its healthy state, in its early sickness state, and the trajectory of change. Now, that data can be turned into information to both help the individual or help the healthcare system to make earlier interventions, and even personalize that to your unique biology, which is very, very exciting. But if the healthcare system is still a system that thinks that it operates by people wearing white coats, sat in clinics, waiting for you to come in through the door, they're going to be cut off for that information. And one of the interesting time and motion studies that was done to show the opportunity for digital health showed that even if you have a chronic disease and some complications, i.e. you're quite a sick person, as long as you're not an inpatient, people spend less than 0.01% of their time in the presence of a healthcare professional, and over 99.99% by themselves, usually at home or in work or in living their life. So digital really, and these sensors be able to take healthcare out to where you are in the context that you live, in the moments that things are happening, to give you insight as to what you're doing, how it affects your health, where you are within your health journey. So the opportunity for Silicon Valley or other actors to come in and colonize that space is a potential challenge to the healthcare system. So part of the work I'm doing is saying, wake up and smell the coffee. To not get involved in thinking about how to provide digital health is a decision on of itself, which is likely to let in Silicon Valley to basically disintermediate their public healthcare system. And as we know, the customers of most interest will be the ones that have the most money, or be the most attractive or interesting to advertisers. And the risk of allowing that to install itself as a default model is that we'll end up with a two-tier healthcare system where those that are attractive to pursue will get this new enhanced healthcare, and those in disadvantaged communities who are less interesting to advertisers and business models are likely to be left to further deteriorate in health. So there is a public ethical responsibility, I would argue, that we need to step up to the plate to engage in this agenda, and also make sure that the fruits and benefits of that are widely distributed to everyone, not just the few.
Yeah, the danger of a two-track system, or a system driven by the economics we have, and we'll come on to Valueism and the economics we have in a moment. But before we do, let me just ask you this. If I was able to give you a magic wand, and you were able to make, you know, the decisions that need to be made to accelerate and bring in the kind of thing that we're talking about, what decisions would you make? What would you change?
Well, around healthcare?
Yeah. Bit of an unfair question, probably, but what springs to mind?
Healthcare is a very complex space, and one of the things that I've seen from working in it, there are so many really committed people who really care, to whom are supremely frustrated that we can't be doing a better job. So there's huge amounts of goodwill and keenness to do something better. What massively constrains, I think, the ability to undergo transformation in healthcare is that there is so much bureaucracy. Things are tied down and measured. Someone was telling me one hospital has 453 outcome measures that everyone's held accountable to. So in people being trapped into trying to achieve measures and targets that they're then held accountable financially and performance-based, means that the scope for thinking outside the box, even having the time to do it, never mind the ability to do it, means that people are kind of imprisoned in the bureaucracy that runs them red hot with, so there's just no space, or either intellectually or time, to think collectively about how can we do this better with the new tools and technologies that are coming along. So I think there's giving people time and freedom to investigate how we could be doing this better with the new tools that are coming along. I think giving people the space and time to contemplate and think about that would make a huge difference to how innovation starts to bubble from the bottom up into across the healthcare service.
Yeah, and obviously there's a natural tie there to the economics, isn't there? And we've already touched on how, should we call it the economics of advertising drives Silicon Valley, and how it potentially could come to drive health. Tell you, you mentioned valueism when we were talking about the economy before, and we were talking about the roots of so many of our problems are clearly traceable. The planet, whether it's the planet, whether it's so many of these raft of issues in terms of poverty and exclusion and inequality and financial injustice and so on are clearly rooted in the economics. So tell us about valueism.
Yes. So this is some work I've been doing with Paul Barnett of the Strategic Management Forum. He's been doing a lot of writing about this, and his work is, you can see it on LinkedIn. It's well worth pointing people to look at that. But so the ideas we've been thinking about is in a world where money dominates, and especially one could argue the neoliberal kind of era, which maximizing shareholder value has become not only a culture, but a fiduciary duty. This orientation that if you can make more money, then it's good. That the economy and society is measured primarily by GDP, and the economy comes first and everything comes second. What we know is it's financialized almost every aspect of life. And if it makes money, there is a case for doing it. Now, what we're starting to see more widely around the economy and society writ large is that that way of thinking creates externalities, whether it's polluting the environment, damaging the ozone layer, or the global warming. Those things have historically been off balance sheet. We can kind of do those things and not account for them in our economics. And therefore, if we can make a profit and we don't need to account for them, then that's fair game and off we go. Systemically, we're now seeing that's coming back to haunt us because we live in a finite world with finite resources and we can't exploit it forever. But that attitude to externalities also plays out in the more subtle ways into society writ large. So often, critiques of advertising would say, advertising isn't just about features and benefits. It's often about stretching the truth, flirting with lying to try and get people to buy stuff that they probably either didn't need or is not as good as the advertising says it is. We're taking workers, there are, I know, 1 million people on 0 hours contracts. We can take human people and essentially exploit them to the level that they don't even have a secure job. Not only have a secure job, but a significant number of workers can't even exist on the income they've got and need to be supplemented by the state through benefits. Yeah. So it's almost like the state is now subsidizing firms to hire people through the need to payment. So we've got that issue. Then we've also got the role that organizations play in society. So whether they're, hiding or shifting stuff offshore to avoid tax, or whether they're polluting the environment, or whether they're contributing to society writ large. What we've got as a result of being able to externalize things that matter to real people in real society and the real planet is a situation where one could argue that now we serve business rather than business serving our interests. And the wreckage of that is now starting to be manifest. So valueism was really a sense of there is wealth creation and creativity and innovation that comes out of capitalism. So it's not all bad. And we're not sort of saying that all capitalism is bad, but what it's orientating and optimizing for doesn't take account of all the things that really matter. So valueism is really saying all those externalities that are causing harm, how can we make them internal to the balance sheet? To be like, how do we think about, how do organizations think about their wider responsibilities in the pursuit of being successful? So what does this mean practically? It means thinking about what is it that customers, the people they look to serve, what is it that they truly value? What does value mean for customers? What could we be doing to serve our customers better? And how would we get compensated for truly delivering value rather than extracting from them by pretending to do something that we're not doing, or selling them subservient, bad products, or putting clauses in the contracts that allow us to claw money out of them, et cetera, et cetera. How do we create value rather than extract value? How do we take that lens and apply it to our employees? How do we create an environment where we encourage and enable people to bring the best of themselves to work? How do we create a purpose of the organization that people want to come and work and want to offer their creativity to that purpose, such that an organization can mobilize and be more effective at creating value for people? Then we get sort of both sides of the equation now, creating value for society and creating value for workers. And if the institution itself is aware of its impact in society, how can it create and offer something to society beyond it's just operating in its current business model? How can it be a good actor that contributes to the commons, to the good? So valueism is really saying the engine of capitalism needs to be refocused to optimizing for money and profit to one of value. And there's a lot of leaders, I think, who are around the system at the moment who are warming to that as a sort of unifying idea of how we sort of bend the arc of capitalism into something that serves the interests of society rather than extracts from it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear these parallel, the I recently found some folks in the States who are thinking in very much similar and parallel lines, coming to rightly to very similar conclusions. I think, though, haven't we been a little distracted by a kind of dualism that sort of, you know, we need to be realistic. What we actually have at the moment, certainly in many areas, is predatory capitalism.
Yeah.
And there isn't just one capitalism. You know, some people would argue that if you're not a proper capitalist and believe in what they believe in, then you must be a, you know, to the left and maybe a socialist or even worse. But let me ask you, isn't there more than one form of capitalism, of the different kinds? And isn't capitalism in any case underpinned by, or not, in the case of greed is good, by values? Does capitalism have to be predatory?
I don't think it has to be predatory. And this comes back to this question of value again. Like, if your primary interest is your shareholders or financiers and their needs come first, then there's a strong incentive to do what is necessary to achieve the returns that they're looking for. And what happens is that the quality or the curiosity or the ability to deliver true value for customers become compromised. If you start taking shortcuts, there's pressure to cut wages or change working conditions, etc., to hit the numbers that will deliver the returns. And there was an interesting piece of work done by Colin Price on Beyond Performance, and where when he was an executive at McKinsey's, they undertook a huge survey of senior people across multiple large institutions, mainly, to say, if your exam question was, how do I maximize this quarterly's reporting, what would you do around product innovation, customer treatment, operations, personnel, And they collected all the answers, and they said, okay, if your exam question was, how do you build long-term sustainable success for this organization, what would you do around customers, people, and And when he collected the answers and compared them, they were almost exactly the opposite. And what was really interesting is that once you have a financially driven short-term orientation, the behaviors that spawn out of that are ones that end up creating harm for the longer term sustainability of the institution, and also create more of these external harms in terms of externalities. So one form of capitalism would be to shift this focus on short-termism, which drives all these behaviors that cause all these externalities, and locate it into the longer term. What do we need to do to be sustainable in the longer term, to create true value for the people we serve? And one interesting example of that is Johnson & Johnson. So 100 years ago, their founder created a credo, which we're here to serve our customers as well as we possibly can, and serve our employees and the communities we operate in. And our final stakeholder is our shareholders, to whom we will give a reasonable return. So encoding that ethos into an organization, Johnson & Johnson over that 100-year period has probably been the organization that's given the best returns to shareholders, funny enough, most consistently over time. And one could argue in part it's because of this ethos towards orienting with curiosity and authenticity as much as possible towards creating sustainable long-term value. It's a different way of thinking about doing capitalism.
Mm. And it sounds like something in balance,
yeah,
rather than trying to maximize.
Yes.
Circular.
Yes, it is about imbalance. And I think, I mean, Johnson & Johnson have made their errors. I mean, the talc powder scandal in South Africa comes to mind. And also we're becoming much more aware now about the contribution, the externalities that a lot of organizations have to the environment, for example. And I think climate is one of those areas where it's forcing every institution to recognize that its actions have consequences beyond its balance sheet, and that there's a societal responsibility to partake in recognizing that as a problem and owning up to their contribution towards doing something about it. And this consciousness that there's more to it than just making money. There are collective responsibilities to the world that we operate in, I think is heralding a deep sense of reflection that this way of thinking actually percolates even deeper into how we create value, how we treat our employees. One thing I'll just add on to that from my own perspective is that what I've seen is a lot of younger people coming into the workplace now with a very different value set. You know, climate and these things are really, really important. I was speaking to a professor at the London Business School who was shocked to find that 40% of her MBA students were wanting to go and work in social enterprises, where historically they want to go and work in the city and earn money. That there's a distinct shift in the consciousness of younger people, which is much more towards this wider set of care and concerns. And at the flip side, the ones that are just about to retire, there's a sense a lot of the captains of industry now no longer need to climb the greasy pole. They've already got there, but they're interested in their own legacy. And there's a lot of them now reflecting back on the world that they've been participating in creating, wanting to bring this kind of change. Now reflecting, now sort of asking questions of their own industry. So I see both the younger and those about to retire, both focusing their efforts on this new agenda. So there is hope, although the institutions and systems we operate in are still highly tuned to the profit maximization agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And we much need some of the new thinking to underpin and make operative, you know, some of those generational changes that you've outlined there. So as we kind of move towards the end and kind of run out of time, let me ask you, you know, what are the messages or advice or injunctions in even that you'd like to leave with the audience? If there's maybe one or two things that you'd like to leave with them, what should we do? What should we think about? What, you know, what are those things?
Well, I think that what COVID has taught us when we all had to sort of go on lockdown is realizing that many of us were like hamsters in the wheels, running around doing our daily lives and being involved in institutions that were kind of running and spinning, and what it gave us a chance was to step off that sort of hamster wheel and kind of reflect, like, what the hell have I been doing with my life? What the hell are we doing with the institutions that we're running and building? And it's given a lot of people a cause to kind of take stock of where we are and where we're going. And part of this, where are we and where are we going, is also a recognition that not only are we responsible for running the world as it is today and the organizations and institutions in it, but we're also have a responsibility to the future. We're stewards of the world today to hand over to the next generation. And one of the things I would say is really important for people to think deeply about is to step back a little bit and say, where are we going? Is what I am doing and what I'm participating in creating something that's taking us to a better place, or am I and my institution actually part of the problem? Because collectively, it feels as though we're in a really important moment in history where things could accelerate quite quickly in a very damaging way, whether it's accelerated climate damage or breakdown in society because inequalities are growing dramatically, which in itself will destabilize the economies itself. We are in a very pivotal moment in human history. And I think it's duty on all of us who care to step back, to think deeply about where are we going and what could I do in my place, my position in this hierarchy, to start to bring conversations into my organization or the way I do my own work that drive things more towards a better long-term future. I think we all need to become conscious and aware and participate in that debate and that collective action.
Thank you, and to be thinking about the COVID spring. Yeah, absolutely. So, been a fascinating conversation, Andy, and a really interesting vista that you've painted for us. I'm sure there will be more debate, yes. And we'll be hearing from you again before too long. But for now, Andy Wilkins, founder of Vision4Health, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barry. I look forward to continuing the conversation. All right, take care.
Me too.